Cancer Alley is an 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River in Louisiana, and it has become shorthand for one of the most urgent environmental justice crises in the United States. Lined with more than 100 petrochemical plants, it's often talked about in terms of statistics and headlines. But in a new podcast, The Corridor, these abstractions start to fall away. It's revealing something much more human, the lived experiences, histories, and deep-rooted connections of the communities who call this region home. The Corridor is an offshoot of the Peabody Award-winning podcast Threshold. In today's episode of Biophilic Solutions, we're joined by Jaha Nailah Avery, a journalist and storyteller from Asheville, North Carolina. She's trained in constitutional and civil rights law at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She moved from the tech world to writing, with work featured in the New York Times, Rolling Stone, and Architectural Digest. Her work centers on documenting and preserving Black history, from interviewing Jim Crow survivors in her book, Those Who Saw the Sun, to her latest project, producing and hosting The Corridor. In our conversation, she shares how a single article about Cancer Alley sparked a bigger question. How did we get here? And set her on a path to trace the connections between slavery, land use, and modern-day environmental harm. We talk about the legacy of plantation country and the role that oral storytelling plays in preserving history and preventing its erasure. What emerges is a far more nuanced picture that holds both injustice and resilience, hardship and community. And it's a conversation about why listening matters and what becomes possible when we truly hear the stories that shape a place.
So it's an 85-mile stretch of land, and there are over 150 petrochemical plants on this 85-mile stretch of land. One thing that I always highlight up front is that 200 years ago, this same stretch of land was called plantation country, because instead of petrochemical plant after petrochemical plant, there was sugarcane plantation after sugarcane plantation there.
So, Jaha, welcome to Biophilic Solutions. It's so great to have you here today. Your work is just incredible, and I'm so excited to dive in. The first thing I really want to ask you is, you've really built your career around documenting lived experiences. It could have been elders who lived through Jim Crow, which you have an incredible book on, communities facing environmental harm in Louisiana. What draws you to these kind of stories? Like, how did this sort of start?
Well, first, thank you guys so much for having me. I am very honored to be here. I love being able to speak about this. And so thank you so much. I was raised primarily by my grandparents. And so I was always around elders. So I grew up just kind of listening and watching and just being very aware of the conversations and the things that were going on around me. And at one point I decided, you know what, I need to actually interview some people in my family, because there were some things that they were saying that, especially as I started getting older and started to realize the value in the stories that I had heard 1,000 times and didn't think anything of. But then I got older and I'm like, wow, I've been hearing this all my life, but it's almost like I saw it in a new light. I began with my granddaddy, and I interviewed him and his first cousin, and then just started interviewing other elders in my family, elders at church. And it was really just something I was doing for myself. Like, I just want to preserve these memories, which I'm very glad that I did, because my granddaddy is deceased now.
Yeah.
And so it's such a beautiful thing to have. In Those Who Saw the Sun, my first book, I shared one of my favorite proverbs, which is, when an elder dies, a library burns. And
wow,
I think that's just so powerful and beautiful, because, it really shows us the urgency of talking to people while we can. documenting and preserving these memories and this history while we can. And so that's really how all of that started. I just like talking to people and being in people's business, I guess.
No, that's great. But you started out as a lawyer, which I think is interesting. And then you've gotten into journalism and then now podcasting. How did that inform your work?
Yeah, so I went to law school. I loved law school, but I wasn't a fan of the profession.
Mm.
I realized that the thing that I liked the most was actually talking to clients.
Mhm,
And as a
mhm,
lawyer, that's such a small part of your day to day.
mhm.
And so once I made that realization, I said, okay, well, obviously this is not for me because I'm not getting to do enough of what I love. And so that's
Mhm.
why I did not stay in the legal profession. I actually worked in startups for a couple of years. I I worked at Uber, actually, Uber corporate.
Oh, wow.
I was part of the team that brought Uber to the Southeast United States,
Okay.
which was very interesting because when I first started there, nobody knew what Uber was,
Sure.
which is hard to imagine a time, where
Yeah, it's
Uber.
such a
Yeah, like
shorthand
everyone
for
knows. Yeah, it's such a part
mhm,
of culture now. And so, because we were out in the community talking to people about what Uber was, and that was one of the main barriers is when Uber first became a thing, people are like, I'm not getting in a car with a stranger.
right.
So that was our biggest barrier was
Mhm,
how do we make it so that people feel comfortable doing that? And a big part of that was the narrative. I
mhm.
had always been a storyteller to some degree, literally all my life. But professionally, I really recognize the power of a story. And then I went to another ride share, a nonprofit ride share. I was there for 4 years and I got laid off at the very start of the pandemic. And
Mhm.
so I said, you know what? I'm going to use this time to figure out how to be a writer. I had always wanted to be a writer. I have time. We're all at home. And I was getting unemployment as well. And 6 months after I launched my professional writing business, I got my first byline in the New York Times. And
That's
so that just
incredible.
opened the door and, everything kind of just started from there.
Yeah, no, that it's incredible. And so tell me a little bit about actually I would love to ask also could you do a podcast as well? It's called The Corridor. And I know that this kind of came together out of our mutual friend Amy who did the Threshold podcast. So tell me how did that project come together? Did Amy Martin approach you? Did the team at Threshold reach out? And like what made you want to be a part of it?
So I read an article about Cancer Alley. This was
Mm,
in November, I believe, I think it was November of 2022.
mhm,
Read it. I was shocked by it. And I just kind of made a mental note. Okay, I need to go back and look into this some more.
mhm.
Um, because, like most reporting on Cancer Alley, even now, it gives a snapshot as to what's going on. But I immediately thought, I need to know how we got here.
Yeah.
And so made a mental note. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, I actually saw a call for proposals. Amy and Threshold put out a call for proposals for writers. They were looking for a writer to
Ah,
propose a 4 to 7 episode season. So, an idea around which they could build a season.
okay.
And then to come on to Threshold as a producer to essentially bring that season to life.
Amazing.
And it's so funny because I saw the call for proposals the day before the deadline. So I ended up, and I thought back to the idea about Cancer Alley, and I'm like, I already knew, and this is really how a lot of my ideas come about is that I become curious about something. And
Mhm,
I feel like if I'm curious about this, other people have to be curious about this as
mhm.
well. And so I already knew that I wanted to do a deep dive on Cancer Alley because obviously something like that doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, maybe this is something that they'll be interested in. So I stayed up late, put together the proposal. And then 2 months later and several rounds of interviews later, they extended an offer for me to come on to create the season.
That's so cool. People probably understand the term or they've heard the term Cancer Alley,
Yes.
and they might understand it in a general. And your focus had really been in Louisiana, correct?
Yes.
So it can feel very abstract. I think people use statistics and numbers are so cold. And so tell me how you are sort of through your reporting, you're sort of bringing it to life with your storytelling. And maybe even define it and like where did that term come from? Like why do we even have this term?
Yeah, so Cancer Alley is an 85-mile stretch of land. It's about 45 minutes outside New Orleans, which was
Mm-hmm.
another thing that was shocking to me because I grew up going to New Orleans and had no idea about Cancer Alley.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an 85-mile stretch of land, and there are over 150 petrochemical plants on this
Yes.
85-mile stretch of land.
God.
One thing that I always highlight up front is that 200 years ago, this same stretch of land was called plantation country
Huh.
because instead of petrochemical plant after petrochemical plant, there was sugarcane plantation after sugarcane plantation
Wow.
there.
Okay.
And so, this same stretch of land has been the site of centuries of exploitation and abuse
Mm-hmm.
for Black communities.
Yep.
And so that is that's what Cancer Alley is boiled down into a sentence. But what I found is that the country is calling this stretch of land Cancer Alley, and it's being defined in these terms. But for the communities there, this is their home.
Yeah.
This is not Cancer Alley. This is
Mm-mm.
not, this obscure, abstract place or this, just terrible place. I mean,
Mm.
people there in these communities, they love their home. They have beautiful memories there. I've been invited to crawfish boils and to people's homes and
Mhm.
sitting on front porches talking about their memories growing up there.
Sure.
And that is really the biggest takeaway that I took away. And the thing that I also want people to understand about this area is that, this is people's home. This is
Mhm.
this is where people's memories are, where their ancestors are buried,
Yeah.
where they, grew up singing in the church choir. And so they love this place.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of the discussion around Cancer Alley, this piece is what's missing.
Mhm.
We always hear about it from a policy standpoint and a medical
Right.
standpoint and a scientific standpoint, which is, we do need to be hearing about it from
Sure.
all of those perspectives. But what is typically missing is the connection that people have to this place.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of the work that you're doing is that you're making it real, right? If we're not living in a place, right, and obviously something global like everything that's happening over in the Middle East right now is a total abstraction. If we've never been, we don't understand anything that's going on. But then we come back home, right, to America. But even Louisiana can be an abstraction if you've never been, you've never met the people, you don't know what the area looks like. So you're sort of bringing it to life, which I think is so incredible. Tell me a little bit about the importance of telling these stories, right? Because I think what you're doing, and you just did, even talking about that they were plantations before, is you're connecting the past to the present. And then ideally, we can look to the future so we either can right wrongs or potentially not continue to do what we're doing. But why is it so important to connect the past to the present?
Well, that's exactly it, is that we need to understand the thing is what we're seeing today. There is nothing that we're seeing today that we can't go back and trace the roots of it,
Hmm.
and go back and look at the history, learn from the history. And it's so important because, this is such a something that's repeated so much that it's become cliche, but
Yeah.
those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. And
Yeah.
that is so true. And I think that we are seeing that. And those of us that study history and look at history,
Mhm.
this is not the first cycle of some of these things that we're seeing.
Mm-mm.
This is probably the
Mm-mm.
10th.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it continues to happen. And a lot of that is because of the fact that we are not learning from history. To begin to learn from history, you have to first seek history and acknowledge history. And so, that's one of the first steps right there, is to actually seek it out, to be open to hearing these stories. And so I think it's very important for us to hear people's stories in their own words. And that's a big part of why I am such an advocate for oral history. That is such an important piece of my work. Even when something, if I'm doing a print article, or for instance, The Corridor, I may be quoting someone, but that person has entrusted me with their story. They have shared their story with me. And in the case of reporting for The Corridor, I spent a lot of time in Cancer Alley. And again, people invited me into their homes.
Right.
They pulled out photo albums that had pictures that were 50 years old in them and shared those with me. Or they shared their photos of them playing football in high school or something like that.
Right.
And so that's something that I don't take lightly. I really consider myself to be a vessel. And so in me seeing these things and hearing these things, my goal is to then share those things with other people who may not ever go to Cancer Alley to see and hear these things. And so, yes, it is important that we understand the history and what some of the things that we are seeing today, where they come from and what they're rooted in.
So go a little deeper for me on the work of The Corridor and Cancer Alley, because there's a lot of I don't know what the right word is, but just, I don't want my feelings hurt. I don't want to feel bad about what happened in the past, whether I had any effect or my ancestors or where I'm living now. So then people ignore it, or they are trying to erase it. And thinking through, like, truth, yes, can be painful, but it's so important to, well, I guess I have two questions for you. So one, give me a little bit more, because the repetition of what's happening, where this community is really being economically disadvantaged, repressed, like whatever, they're taken advantage of, whatever the appropriate term is. They were taken advantage of, they were being enslaved and colonized. And then we had Jim Crow. And then now, in a way, it's still happening. It's just in another form. So talk to me a little bit more in depth there. And then I'd love to hear the reaction you're getting from this awareness that people might have who just don't know the history.
Yeah, so I have been told that this is a bold claim, but one thing that I often share with people is that there is not one issue facing Black communities today and facing the country at large today that does not have its roots in slavery. You can give me any issue, and I can trace that through line back to American chattel slavery.
Yeah.
And so starting there, if we are too concerned about preserving people's feelings,
Right.
that we do not go back and, understand those roots and really dig into those roots, again, we we are just doomed to repeat this cycle again and again and again.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me too that people even think that that's a bold claim, because I see it so clearly, and those of us that do this work, it's so evident. But then, it's just the idea of the unwillingness of some people to acknowledge this and to really, dig into this. With that being said, the reception has been great so far. And in all my work, I really have had people tell me, I've never thought about it this way. I've never thought about it this deeply. I think that another issue is that a lot of people don't have opportunities to engage with some of these ideas and some of this work.
That's true.
And we can say, well, we live in a time where the opportunity is always there. And yes, that is true to a certain degree, because we have access to all type of information.
Sure.
However, we have access to too much information in some
Yeah,
cases.
it's distracting. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I definitely think that, especially as we see these efforts to water down history in the American public school system,
Mm-hmm.
those do represent really powerful opportunities to engage in
Mm-hmm.
truth telling and in understanding the past. And, there are these major efforts to take that away from children. And so, once
Mm-hmm.
you reach adulthood, you're kind of like, okay, well, I mean, I didn't learn it in school. So some people are like, well, if it was that important, it would have been taught to me in school.
But it's context too, right? I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, but I grew up in Los Angeles, California. The history that I learned in elementary school was focused on a different kind of oppression. It was Native Americans, and but they didn't even say that. In the mission system in California, and they didn't even talk about it. They just sort of hailed these beautiful buildings that oh yeah, there happened to be a bunch of people living. They didn't explain, right? So as a Californian, I didn't get a lot of Black history. I didn't get a lot of Southern history. We understood slavery, but it wasn't until I moved to the South and I got involved with organic agriculture that I started learning through that group the absolute horrendous history in agriculture in the Black community of breaking up co-ops and taking land. And, that's the whole Jim Crow story. But it wasn't just a bunch of individuals like you're thinking, oh, it's a bunch of really bad white guys that were doing these things. It's like, no, it was the American government
Yeah,
that was
it's
setting these
systematic.
policies.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a shocking history for me to learn, right? As somebody who we've for years, and maybe less so in the past 10 years, have, American exceptionalism. We're always the good guys. But it's like, oh, we've done a lot of really, really bad stuff in the past. So, but facing it and understanding it is so important, right? Because to your point, we're going to repeat, which is exactly what's happening in Cancer Alley. The repetition is happening. People are being taken advantage of because these petrochemical plants just came in. Maybe they didn't have a voice. Maybe they didn't have the power to fight back against it. But talk a little bit about what they're doing now. Now that it's super aware, it has been documented. You have Human Rights Watch. You have the EPA. You have the University of New Orleans. There's tons of you're doing the incredible storytelling that basically the government failure to rein in the fossil fuels. I know we're getting into even a whole, another area of nobody wants to talk about. But I think it's really important. If we don't have awareness, we can't make decisions.
Yeah. And I do want to, again, highlight first that that is also why oral history is such a powerful tool of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
If we rely on quote unquote official documents, which again, I always implore people to ask themselves, whose version is official?
Who wrote it?
Yeah. And what does official mean? Because for me, growing up as a Black Southerner, to me, if a Black elder tells me something, it's as true as if I've read it in any book.
Right.
Oral history is such a powerful tool of resistance. Community organizing is such a powerful tool of resistance.
Yes.
And so to go back to your question, this is an area and a community that has such a strong sense of the power of grassroots organizing. And they always have. These are the descendants of people who organized the largest slave revolt in American history in 1811.
Yeah.
When I read more about that slave revolt, I was just so impressed because, these are people that it's not like they had freedom of movement. No. And they were able to just go and talk to each other freely.
No. And the consequences were dire. I mean,
the consequences were dire.
Killed. Yeah. I mean,
exactly. And so to be able to organize something on that level that involved hundreds of people, and I think it was close to 50 or more plantations involved. Well, you're not even able to talk to people.
Yeah, there's no social media to gather us together for a day.
Exactly. Yeah, and they couldn't even leave the plantation without a pass, and most of them were not able to get passes. So
Right.
I want to start there. So these are the ancestors of the people that currently live in Cancer Alley. So they have organizing and resistance is in their DNA.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's in their very DNA. And also the idea of they are going to fight for their agency. They're going to fight for their freedom and for their dignity and to protect their communities. Their ancestors showed them that.
Yeah.
So there's so much community organizing going on there today. In the course of my time there, I can't tell you how many public meetings I attended, how many different community organizing gatherings that I went to. Every single week, there are various gatherings, meetings, hearings going on where people are actually going into some of these town councils and things like that and speaking up on behalf of their communities.
Right.
And so there's organizing going on many different levels. There's organizing going on the legal in the legal sense. So
Right.
there have been lawsuits filed. There's organizing going on from a policy sense. People are attending public hearings where permit decisions are being made. You know, one of the major ways to actually address the permitting process.
Right.
And who is, you know, how are these plants able to get permits to be able to operate in the first place?
Right.
Louisiana has made that extremely easy. In fact, a lot of the reporting that is required, they accept the reporting straight from the plants themselves. Like essentially, they allow the plants to report
on
the
themselves.
level of emissions that they're emitting, and there really is no oversight, which is, you know, I was shocked by the lack of oversight here. And so the communities have taken it upon themselves to really do what the government should be doing, which is regulating and putting in place oversight for these plants. And so now what Louisiana has done is they have essentially made it to where community collected data cannot be considered when it comes to the permit process.
What?
Yes, because the communities were doing such a good job in collecting the data on the, you know, the pollutions and the emissions going on.
God.
And so they were doing such a good job that it was affecting the permitting or, you know, they were bringing into these permitting decisions, hey, this plant is saying that it's emitting this, but actually it's emitting this. And they were having the evidence, which I want to also note the communities a lot of the time shoulder these costs themselves.
Sure.
Which is also extremely ridiculous because you should not be having to pay to make sure that your air is clean.
Well, and so many heavy manufacturing plants or chemical plants like this, to your point, the government and policies and whether that was local or federal didn't think about what we're putting out, right? Nobody was being charged for what was going into the waterways or going into the air. I don't know the history enough, but I do know that nobody was taking the cost to nature and the people into account when they were approving anything. And nobody was taking that cost into account because we take people for granted, we take nature for granted, and nobody's following up. And that has changed over the years, but by no means enough, right? I mean, even the fact that, you know, the Human Rights Watch just finished in 2024, you know, interviewing people to document the impacts of the fossil fuel and petrochemical operations on the local residents, you know, shows that we're just slowly catching up to this.
Yeah, and you know that's something, a pattern that we see. Cancer Alley in Louisiana is not the only cancer alley in the world. There are cancer alleys all over the world. I'm from North Carolina. The modern day environmental justice movement was born in Warren County, North Carolina. And one pattern that we see over and over again is people in these communities know what's going on, and they begin advocating for themselves years, sometimes decades before any policy, anything on the policy level gets done, anything on the governmental level gets done. Like they understand what's going on, and they typically, before everything else catches up, these communities have been advocating for themselves and engaging in this environmental justice work for
Mm-hmm.
years and years. And we see that happen again and again in communities all over this country and all over the world.
Yeah.
And so I think, one of the things that we really need to be examining and taking steps to change is, why aren't communities taken seriously when they recognize, hey, like one of the communities in Cancer Alley, one of the things that really sparked an investigation decades ago was that many women in this same community began having miscarriages.
Right.
The people there saw this pattern. And so, as soon as they saw this pattern and began raising awareness about this, how can we change our systems and our structures to address community concerns and take them
Right.
seriously as soon as communities begin talking about them? I think that that's a big, one of the major gaps in this discussion as well. There's a gap in between when the community realizes something is going on and when there's
Mm-hmm.
large scale action to address it.
Yeah. What do you think it is? Like, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day that data centers obviously are a huge topic right now. I feel like some state just banned them, but even here in Georgia, like I think we have some of the most that are coming in, but all the communities are coming up and trying to say no more. Somebody said, "Well, what do I do? How do I get involved?" And the individual said, "You know what you need to do is you need to get involved with your city council. You need to go to those meetings before." Sort of an issue arises or you see the problem because if you're just not engaged, period, then you don't already have the groundwork built to sort of get in there and affect when you see something wrong, whether that's a petrochemical plant being approved or do you find that people are getting more engaged on the local level? Like what would you advise for people to do today
Well,
before you even see a problem?
so one thing that I will say, and again, going back to some of the experiences that I have heard here at home in North Carolina and
Yeah.
just all over the place, I think that first of all, there's a misconception that Black people are not in an environmental justice space and that we don't care about the environment.
Huh.
I have heard that before
Huh.
from many people.
Mhm.
There's this misconception about
Mhm.
that, and again, I always connect it to history. You have situations where newly freed people were fighting for their communities because they were being put into these communities
Right.
near these sewer systems and things like that. And they're like, no, we don't want that in our communities.
Right.
So I think that there is such a long powerful history of Black people understanding what's going on in their communities, but just
Mhm.
not being taken
Taken
seriously, not
seriously.
being
Mhm.
listened to. And so I wanted to start there because again, there is this misconception and it couldn't be further from the truth. And
Mhm.
what's interesting is that in an environmental sense, you could not have been enslaved in this country and not understand and have a thorough understanding of nature and the environment here.
Right.
Like, I mean,
Right.
it's just ridiculous to
Yeah.
even suggest that. And
Mhm.
then, of course, that knowledge again was passed down and passed down and passed down. And so it's just such a ludicrous notion that Black people are not in this space. But again, it
Mhm.
goes back to visibility and whose voices are being heard.
Well, that's it. Exactly. Like who's being raised up, who's being focused on, and that's what's
Exactly.
so beautiful about your work is you're doing it in a way you balance the kind of the tough reality of environmental racism or racism in general, but you're also highlighting the beauty of the community and the beauty and resilience and the resistance, which I think is
Yeah.
a nice balance because it is hard for any topic for us to just, be beaten down with these negative, negative, negative. And it's like to have the beauty and the resilience be kind of like that bookend to it, I think is so important. And that's what's so great about your work.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And so going back to your question, what can people do?
Yeah.
First of all, listen to people that are living in these communities.
It's like a real simple start with listening.
That's the easiest and most obvious thing, but sometimes the most obvious thing is not I guess people just don't think about doing that.
Right.
So the first thing is to actually listen to people that are living in these communities that this country has designated as so-called sacrifice zones. Listen to these people. Think about why it's okay to even sacrifice anybody.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say that would definitely be the first thing. Yes. And then getting involved in going into these meetings, because I mean, I think that we're going to continue to we see this all across the board, even in communities that are not quote unquote sacrifice zones. And you mentioned the data centers. All of us at some point are going to be in a position where we're going to have to fight for our communities.
Yep.
And so I definitely think that being involved in these spaces, being involved, just like the communities, the people in Cancer Alley, again, they go to these public meetings. They are there. Not only are they there, but they come armed with their lived experiences. They come armed with community collected data. So it's not just about being in the space, but engaging with the space as well.
Yeah.
Those are the first two things that everybody can do.
Yeah. Which is great. And again, listening, which we'll just make it a pun of like listen to the corridor, but it is listening and being willing and open to hear tough stories and tough history and just accept it. But I also like how you're saying from official channels sometimes don't actually have the real story. You know, they're putting a spin on it.
Exactly. And in Louisiana, there are so many people that are benefiting from the plants being there, but the communities are not benefiting from them being there.
Right.
Even from an economic standpoint, the common narrative is, oh, this is going to create jobs. This is going to boost the economy. But in my reporting, I spoke to economists who refuted that have studied this for years, studied these claims that the Louisiana legislature is making that, oh, it is creating these jobs, and directly refuted that through their research.
Right.
And again, this is something that you didn't even necessarily need research to show this, because when you go and you talk to the people in the communities, they will tell you a lot of the times when the plant opens, they bring people that are outside of this community to come and work in the plants.
Yep.
And there are a lot of people there that have built their careers in the plants. And so even for them, they will say, well, when it was time to get promoted, I didn't get promoted. They brought someone else in instead of promoting from within.
From within. Yeah.
So even from an economic sense, these plants are not benefiting the community.
Well, and then if you take the economic negatives, right, of again, back to the health of the people and the environment, there's probably a negative economic benefit.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because one thing that I learned very quickly when I first started reporting in that area, one of the first questions that I would ask people is, do you know anyone that's had cancer? And when I tell you, every single person I talked to, right off the top of their head, they didn't have to think about it.
Right.
Off the top of their head would start listing, yeah, my brother, my sister, my aunt, my best friend, my neighbor, like going through a list. And many of them would also include themselves.
Right.
I met a lot of people who were battling cancer at the time that I spoke to them, or, were in remission from cancer. I spoke with one woman whose brother, he was able to send all of his children through college because of the work that he did with the plants, but he died of cancer. People are being asked to make these impossible choices,
right,
but they're not choices because, the people didn't bring the plants there. The government brought the plants there.
Yeah.
And so and actually people are saying, they are explicitly saying, we do not want these plants here. We don't want any more plants here.
Right.
And again, are not being listened to. However, they are fighting back. And actually there have been some victories. There have been instances where plants were stopped because the community organized and rallied around it. There's a lot of very interesting work being done by the Louisiana Bucket Brigade. They have a genealogist on staff.
Wow.
Because when you find that a site is a burial ground, you can't build on that ground.
Right.
And so that was really, when she came on board, a lot of people were kind of scratching their heads like, well, why would an environmental justice organization have a genealogist on staff?
Right.
But that was a very strategic thing because she goes and she researches these areas. And again, we're talking about an area that was called plantation country. And so
right.
What happened when people died, particularly enslaved people?
Yeah.
I mean, where do people think that they were buried? Of course, they were still going to be buried on that plantation.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And so when you have these plants that are buying this land, it is going to be a burial ground somewhere. There are going to be bodies that are buried somewhere on that land.
Mm-hmm.
And so the genealogist, Miss Lenora Gobert, she's doing just amazing work in uncovering some of these things and using that as a tool to stop further industrialization in this area. But it's such an interesting, it's such an interesting thing there because you have the plants and the community and the plantations.
Right.
So each group has their own interests, and in some places the interests overlap. But one thing that I found quite surprising is that in a lot of instances, you really see the plantations and the community joining together in joint interest because the plantations don't want the plants there either.
Okay. That is interesting.
Yes.
And do you find, I do think there is that's such a great sort of twist, right? That they're
Yes.
sort of using kind of the horrors of the plantation now against the petrochemical people. It's such a creative way to basically stop them, which is great.
It is. And you see, again, it is so interesting when you just think about the whole picture because you would not think that the descendants of enslaved people would have such a strong interest to kind of team up with these sites that enslaved their ancestors. But from the perspective of the plantations, if you're trying to preserve history, you don't want these sites to continue to be bought and turned into an Exxon plant or something like that.
Right.
It's interesting to just go into the plantations there. I visited more plantations in the time that I've been reporting for this season than I had my entire life combined before then. Although I am an advocate for people visiting plantations, especially Black people, because I tell people if we don't go into these spaces and uplift our ancestors, it might not happen.
Yeah.
Because some of the plantations that I went to, they want to show you this beautiful plate and this beautiful house, and they don't talk about slavery at all.
Right. They're not providing the appropriate context and understanding of
yes.
what
to not even say the word slavery on a sugarcane plantation in Louisiana is so insulting.
Yeah.
And so that was something that I had to deal with, took an emotional toll on me to be in these spaces and to, hear Black people continue to be disrespected even in death.
I can't imagine.
But then you have places like the Whitney Plantation that are doing amazing work in uplifting the stories of the enslaved.
Yeah.
So for the Whitney, they're fighting the plants because they want to continue to be able to tell the stories of the enslaved. But then you have other plantations, they're still fighting the plants, but they're fighting the plants because they want to make money as a tourist site, and they actually advertise it as such, come step back in time at such and such plantation. They advertise this Gone with the Wind experience. And so it's such an interesting thing because again, you have these communities that are, even if you have a plantation that has that mentality, if they're fighting the plants, it's like, okay, well, do I really want to even be in bed with them? Or do
right. You're like, wait a minute, we have the same goal.
yeah. And so it's these trade-offs that are being made there every day.
Yeah, but sometimes we have strange bedfellows,
Right. That's true.
For those things. And maybe the outcomes to no petrochemical plant, but then, the way they're interpreting that outcome is not what we want. But I do think, holding up something like the Whitney Plantation is a great example of go learn, understand. There's a lot of reverence for, what happened to really understand it rather than just have a beautiful wedding at a plantation,
Yes,
which just seems completely wrong.
absolutely.
So as we're wrapping up, there's so much more that we could be talking about. And so I really, really encourage people to listen to The Corridor and go get both of your books, Those Who Saw the Sun and I Heard, which is more of a picture book poetry reading about Black history, beautiful on civil rights and really from shores of Africa through slavery to even the Black Lives Matter movement today. So both wonderful books. Is there something that we haven't touched on that's really important you want to share? And then I'd love you to tell us, how can we support you, follow you?
So I want to end by sharing a story, of course.
Great.
I interviewed a 94-year-old woman there in Cancer Alley, Miss Ora Lee. She was born and raised there. And during our interview, she actually shared with me her family's candied pecan recipe.
Nice.
If you are an old school chef, back in the day, that people do not share their recipes. Like old school chefs, they really prided themselves on never sharing their recipes.
Mm-hmm.
So for this to be, an elder who not only was she sharing her recipe, but this was a recipe that had been in her family since slavery. She picked the pecans from her tree in her yard.
Mm-hmm.
And she sat at her kitchen table. I'm thinking I'm just coming to do an interview, and next thing I know, I find myself rooting through her cabinets trying to find the sugar to make this candied pecan recipe. But I'm telling that story just to say these are the type of traditions that are at stake here. This is the legacy that's at stake here. She got this recipe from her great grandmother,
Mm-hmm.
who's buried down the road.
Right.
And she picked those pecans from her tree in her backyard.
Yeah.
And she shared it with me, who at that time, she had only met me 2 or 3 times. But for her to invite me into her home, for her to share this recipe with me, this is something I'm going to remember for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And that is the spirit that exists in Cancer Alley. I only call it that because that's how you talk about it so that people know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But I typically don't call it that when I'm just kind of like sharing stories or telling about who I met there and stuff like that. I don't
Right.
necessarily like that term.
Well, it can be really reductive, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not just Cancer Alley.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I just wanted to end on that story because it's to me, it's touching. It really touched me that she shared that with me, but also to just, again, drive home the fact that this is home to these communities and to these people. And this is the spirit that exists there despite all of what they are dealing with and battling every day. This is who they are.
Right.
Generous, open, welcoming. And in spite of everything else, that has not been taken away. They have not given that away. And they protect that and preserve it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's a beautiful way to end. And I think we should all be thinking that way, right? No matter what's going on, if we can be generous, open, and welcoming, the outcomes will be better and the relationship will be better. Where can we find you? What do you want us to follow? Do you do social media? Definitely listen to the podcast and buy the book. But where should we be following you?
So yes, I am on Instagram.
Right.
I'm on Instagram under Jay _Nailah Nailah, my middle
Great.
name.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm on Instagram, follow Threshold Podcast.
Great.
Threshold really does such amazing work. The team was just incredible because, this is my first, major undertaking in audio.
Sure.
And so me coming on board, they have such an amazing sense of what makes a good story for audio. So the team there Amy, Erica, Sam. I mean, everybody is just incredible. So follow Threshold for sure. And we have some exciting things coming up with
Okay.
the release of the season. And so I'm just really excited about it. I am grateful to have had the opportunity to bring this to life because it's such an important story. Because most of us will never go to Louisiana.
Right.
And if we do, maybe we'll be on Bourbon Street, but we might not be on Cancer, in Cancer Alley. And
Right,
so,
right. Really understanding this other side too.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yes. And so, yeah, follow, and keep an eye out for some exciting announcements ahead.
Good. Well, we're excited. It was lovely to have you on. Thank you for taking the time and sharing the story. And thank you for being the listener, right? You're the listener and you're sharing these stories. I think it's really important. So thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for tuning into Biophilic Solutions. This podcast is hosted by me, Monica Olson, and produced by Katrina Cohen. If you're enjoying these conversations, be sure to follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave us a 5-star rating. Your support genuinely means so much to us, and it helps us reach a wider audience. Until next time.